Shows Vetrano entering Spring Creek Park in Howard Beach on August 2nd, about 5 hours before her body was discovered.
30-year-old Karina never could have thought going for a late afternoon run on a trail next to her home would be dangerous. But on August 2nd, 2016, she went for a run and never returned. This is the heartbreaking case of Karina Ann Vetrano. We offer our deepest condolences to the family and friends of Karina, who will forever cherish her memory. Who was Karina?
By a girl with a fascination with innocence.
Karina Ann Vetrano was her parents' pride and joy, and a wonderful woman loved by many. The 4'11" tall woman was born on the 12th of July, 1986, in New York to Philip and Kathy Vetrano. Her father was a retired firefighter who worked with the New York City Fire Department and was one of the emergency workers at the Twin Towers after the September 11th attacks. Right from a young age, Karina had shown great promise. After earning a master's degree in speech pathology from St. John's University, Karina proceeded to focus on helping children with autism. Besides her impressive career as a speech pathologist, she was an aspiring writer, a part-time club promoter in Astoria, Queens, and a world traveler. She was leading a good life, but it was cut short by the tragic murder. Karina lived with her parents in Howard Beach, Queens, and it was quite usual for her to take late afternoon runs in Spring Creek Park, less than a block away from her home. Usually her father would join her, but on August 2nd, 2016, he decided to stay back due to an aching back. After assuring her father she would return in time for dinner, she left for the park. When it got late and Karina had not returned, her dad tried to call her, but he got no response. Suspecting that something was amiss, Phil reached out to a friend who worked with the New York Police Department to relay his concerns. The friend immediately organized a search party, and by 11 p.m., Phil Vetrano found his daughter's dead body about 100 feet away from the main trail. She was found in the most disturbing state. Her body was covered with scratches and bruises, and she was completely naked. The next day, the autopsy result showed that she was subjected to sexual assault and died from possible strangulation. Her death was immediately ruled a homicide. The bruises on her body gave the detectives insight into how the incident might have played out. The detective suggested that she had been hit on the head with a rock. She then fought her attacker ferociously, even biting him so hard her teeth cracked. The result of her fight led to the DNA of her attacker being found under her fingernails, on her back, and her phone, which was found in the weeds a few feet away. With the DNA, the detectives hoped to get an immediate lead, but things didn't go as planned. The DNA was run through local and national databases, but nothing came up. It seemed like the killer didn't exist. Since the DNA search was futile, they began exploring other means. They called for surveillance footage in the area which might have captured Karina running into Spring Creek Park. Based on the footage, Karina entered the park alone, which meant her killer had met her in the nature reserve. The case was already getting more complicated when another unfortunate incident occurred: the murder of another young woman.
Vanessa Marcotte was killed more than 6 months ago. Investigators have been flooded with information from people looking to help.
Vanessa Marcotte was killed not far from her home in Princeton, Massachusetts during a run. When the media got hold of the news, they immediately linked it to Vetrano's murder due to the proximity of the incidents. However, the DNA and other evidence showed that the murders had been committed by different men, and that was the end of another potential lead. As part of the investigation, the police began to question everyone who had a relationship with Karina, including her parents. And that's where they found out about a potential suspect, a man named Paul. The victim's friend said Paul was one of Karina's colleagues at the nightclub and had made unwanted advances towards her. Her friends claimed he had stalked her and also grew aggressive after being turned down. But the police soon cleared Paul as a suspect because he was at work at the time of the murder. A potential witness also appeared a few days later after Karina's family's press conference was shown on TV. He said he saw a suspicious-looking man in the area during the timeline the police created and helped create a composite sketch which the media immediately released. A former NYPD chief then called in with the claims that someone in his building matched the description of the sketch. The police immediately visited the man, who identified only as Kevin, but he was uncooperative. He refused to provide a DNA sample, and that made him more suspicious. However, after running the DNA they eventually got from him, it did not match the profile connected with Karina's crime scene. After that lead, the police were stuck. There were no new leads, nothing. The families of the victims were furious about the absence of a lead or a suspect, and several citizens were equally furious. A GoFundMe account was created to gather a reward of $250,000 for whoever had information leading up to the arrest of her killer. The account raised over $290,000, but for 6 months after her death, there was nothing. In January 2017, Lieutenant Russo, one of the cops on the case, had an epiphany. The police, who also stayed in Howard Beach, remembered a strange incident that happened just a few months before the murder. He described a suspicious-looking man walking through the neighborhood as if he had ulterior motives. "On the side of the street, one house over, I just see a person walking away from me. He had a long-sleeved tracksuit on with a hoodie up over his head, even though it was 80 degrees, so I said, 'That's odd.'" Rosso wanted to question him immediately, but the young man soon disappeared. However, the next day the opportunity arose when he saw the same young man roaming the street again. He asked for his name, and he learned it was Chanel Lewis.
With the murder of a jogger in Queens.
Investigators want to speak to this man.
Before January, the detectives had considered the suspect to be a white man, but when Russo suggested that it could be an African American, they widened their search. DNA samples from over 300 black men were collected, but none was a match. Then Russo suggested taking an even bolder step by collecting Lewis's DNA and making findings about his whereabouts. Detective Barry Brown, another detective on the case, thought it was a long shot, especially with Lewis not having previous criminal records, just a few run-ins with the police. Twice he was cautioned for violating rules in Spring Creek Park, and another time he was caught urinating in public. There was also an incident when a 911 caller reported a suspicious male with a crowbar in the backyards of several homes, but he wasn't charged with anything. However, in a surprising turn of events, when DNA samples from Lewis were compared to those found on Karina, they matched. He was immediately taken in for questioning, and after long hours of grilling, the police got a confession. On February 4, 2017, he was arrested and charged with 1 count of second-degree murder.
Chanel, anything you have to say to the family?
Chanel Lewis was a 20-year-old unemployed man who lived with his parents and siblings in a low-income housing project in East New York, just a few miles away from the murder scene. It would have been harder to believe that Lewis was involved in the murder if his high school teacher didn't describe his hatred of women. The teacher described an incident where he asked if he could bring a knife to school the next day. When asked why, he said he wanted to stab all the girls. He was suspended from school as a result and was taken into protective custody numerous times due to his mental instability. According to the investigators, Lewis left his home on August 2nd after a fight with his family and walked to the park. Then he came across Karina and presumptuously attacked her with no prior motive. However, it is not certain he hadn't seen her before because he was also a regular at the park. Although his dad tried to defend him by saying Lewis had to go to the hospital the day after the murder, it surprisingly led the police to another important detail. Remember, Karina chipped her tooth during her fight with the attacker. When the investigators visited the hospital, the doctor informed them that he had removed a foreign object from Lewis's hand during the treatment, Karina's tooth. His mother's statement, where she described him looking disheveled upon returning home that night, served as further evidence, and the police were certain they had their guy. On November 5, 2018, the first murder trial began. Lewis entered a plea of not guilty to murder and sexual abuse charges, despite confessing to the murder on a videotape. His lawyers suggested that he had been coerced to confess to the crimes due to his countenance on the videotape. He had seemed confused and even asked to watch cartoons like he didn't know the severity of his crimes.
And then, because of a past situation, I got angry and then started hitting her and stuff like that.
Okay.
The lawyers also suggested that the DNA had been contaminated so that it could suit their purpose. In a statement made to the Wall Street Journal, one of his lawyers, Robert Moeller, said, "It was going nowhere. They were starting to get, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they needed to solve the case. So, along comes somebody, and oh, the profile fits." On November 21, 2018, a judge declared a mistrial due to a hung jury. 7 of the jurors had voted guilty while 5 voted not guilty. Then a retrial was set for the next year. In March 2019, Lewis was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 1 count of sexual abuse. His lawyers' claims of his being coerced were found to be weak after new evidence showed the court a detailed list of his search history before his arrest. His inquiries included questions about indictments, plea deals, prosecution, and several articles about Karina's murder. However, before his sentence date, the case took a shocking turn when the defense lawyers received an anonymous letter from a supposed police officer. The letter showed that before the police turned their attention towards Lewis, they had collected DNA samples from over 360 black men who had once been in custody in parts of Queens and Brooklyn. The letter also explained that the police had thought the murderer to be a white man but decided to change the course of their investigation on a whim. Since the letter indicated racial profiling, the detectives asked the judge for a hearing to determine if the prosecutors withheld crucial evidence, but their request was denied after the prosecutors argued that the letter was sent to disrupt the proceedings. Sergeant Brendan Ryan gave a statement to CBS News describing how hard they worked on the investigation. The NYPD has painstakingly investigated the murder of Karina Vetrano. As the Queens District Attorney demonstrates, the evidence clearly shows that Chanel Lewis is responsible for her death. Multiple legal hearings and 2 years have already exhaustively examined the issues in this anonymous 11th-hour letter, a missive riddled with falsehoods and inaccuracies. On April 13, 2019, Lewis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
With respect to murder in the first degree, the sentence of this court is that you spend the rest of your natural life in jail without any possibility of parole.
Although the public argued that Lewis's guilt was not proved beyond a reasonable doubt, Karina's family was at peace with the verdict because they believed that justice was duly served. In 2021, 40,000 people signed a petition demanding the case be reopened. Several allegations were also made regarding the credibility of the assistant district attorney at the time, Brad Leventhal. However, that only resulted in Leventhal resigning, and Lewis' case remained untouched. That concludes this video. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more true crime videos. Until next time, stay safe.